Welcome to Hybris Conversations. My name is Suresh Kochatar. Today I have with me Dr. Krishna Reddy Nallamala, the country head of Access Health International, a non-profit think tank, advisory group, and implementation partner with a mission to improve access to high-quality health and affordable healthcare to people everywhere. Dr. Krishna Reddy began his career as a cardiologist after the completion of his MD. And then from GB Pant Hospitals, Delhi University, he did his DM in cardiology. He co-founded many enterprises with a mission to evolve models of high quality healthcare that is affordable and accessible. He led a 50-member cardiology professional group as a managing director and co-founded Care Hospitals in 1997, a chain of tertiary care hospitals located in 6 states across India. He has grown the chain across the country as a chief executive officer from 2006 to 2013. Dr. Reddy founded the Relicis Medical Devices in 1998 after realizing India's first coronary stent in collaboration with the legendary Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the then chief of DRDO, in order to create an indigenous technology platform for medical devices to make them affordable. Relicis is the first company in India to have an end-to-end technology capability for stents, catheters, and drug delivery systems. On account of self-sufficiency, the cost of cardiac devices has rapidly been decreasing over the last few years. Dr. Reddy is currently acting as its chairman and managing director. He also piloted a unique rural healthcare delivery model in 2007 in 200 villages having more than 1 million population. The model was based upon specifically trained village healthcare enabled with hand point care technology solutions. It also evaluated the role of microinsurance for primary care. Dr. Reddy was also involved in developing models for primary care and integrated care. He founded the Healthcare Services Group to evolve disease management programs on the principle of care continuum involving nurse-led multidisciplinary team for common acute and chronic diseases. The group is also testing extended care as a means towards integrated care model. He joined Access Health International as its country director in 2018 to lead health systems strengthening efforts. Let us now speak to Dr. Krishna Reddy on issues regarding the COVID-19 and other healthcare delivery models, and the major part of it which he leads, which is actually bringing healthcare as an affordable model to the villages. Welcome to Hybris Conversation, sir. So there are many subjects in this particular one, and when I look at it, the first obvious question that everybody would ask is regarding COVID-19 and other issues that are coming up. But the question obviously would be the need to strengthen our primary medical system spectrum and a host of other subjects that we need to deal with. So let me start with the latest that is happening. Some medical professionals say COVID is a tragedy, others say it's an opportunity. Where do you look at it?
No, I always look at it as an opportunity. Okay. I think every adversity has an opportunity. I will articulate, what we can actually capitalize on this adversity. The first thing I think I would say that the very aspect of prevention, you can bring into the consciousness of the people on the concept of prevention, because now they are able to understand what do you mean by prevention. The simple act of face masking is a prevention. Simple act of hand washing is a prevention, especially in the hospitals. That is how the infection prevention actually came almost 170 years back when Semmelweis he introduced the simple concept of hand washing to reduce the fevers in mothers delivering. That was the first beginning of infection prevention control. So just these 3 aspects, the social distancing or the hand washing or the face masking, if we can extend the same concept to prevention of the various diseases, it's not just the COVID alone. The same face mask can prevent influenza, same face mask can prevent tuberculosis, it can prevent pollution related lung diseases. So it is not limited to just the COVID alone. This extending further on the concept of the prevention, we need to articulate now the people are aware of vaccines. But many adult people are not aware that vaccines are required even to prevent ordinary pneumonias, otherwise also. I mean, as a cardiologist, I see many patients with heart failures. I mean, they get decompensated, they get worsened for an ordinary flu infection. It need not be a severe pneumonia. Any fever, any infection can tilt the balance in people with already damaged organs, whether it's a kidney or it's lung or liver. So this whole concept of prevention, be it fitness in the school age or eating healthy or avoiding bad habits, I mean with the drug menace increasing. So we should use this opportunity. I think the people are geared to understand what you mean by prevention. I think they are geared to adopt these preventive tools. I mean, what was, say, a condoms to prevent HIV? The face mask should be a tool, public health tool to prevent many respiratory illnesses. That is one. The second thing is the world has opened up in terms of opportunity for what is our strength. Our strength is in producing affordable quality drugs. Our strength is in producing quality affordable vaccines, not only for the country but for the whole world. So you are winning two things. I mean, there is a business opportunity, economic opportunity of looking at the world as a bigger market. But more importantly, there is also statesmanship as a country. When you are not just looking at for your own people, the vaccines for your own people, but you are looking at vaccines for the entire world. I think that conveys a different statesmanship compared to many countries which are only looking at securing their people's health. The third opportunity I can look at is in terms of now health has become on the top of the policy agenda. It was never in the top of the political agenda, political discourse or the policy agenda. So we should actually exploit this, that health as top of the policy agenda, and push for what is actually committed by the parliament, that they will spend 2.5% of the GDP. Now they're spending hardly 1% of the GDP. So just increasing that spend to what the parliament has committed as part of the national health policy, not just this health policy, even the previous health policy committed 2.5%, but in the last 20 years we haven't reached that 2.5%. So that's the fourth opportunity I see. And the fifth opportunity which I have been noticing for the first time, the entire public R&D institutes in the country, they have opened up for what is meant by applied research. Otherwise they were closed research, confined to their own research protocols, but now there is an element of applied research, that there is a public responsibility for these research scientists. So their research work is seeing the day of the light in addressing some of the innovative tools to address the COVID. So I will see multiple opportunities arising out of this COVID.
I mean, even I worked for about almost close to a decade in the Indian healthcare system in a leading hospital. So one of the things you mentioned immediately resonated with me in terms of the 1% spend on our healthcare in terms of GDP, and look at the United States, which I think spends around 16%. UK has a very good national healthcare. US has Medicare and Medicaid on the other end of it for the poor people. But in India, healthcare is one of the leading causes for bankruptcy. And that is what we are seeing even in rural India. Somebody falls sick, even in the middle class in urban India, they go bankrupt. Entire family savings is drained out. What, according to you, ails the Indian healthcare system? Because where do we start? Because there is a whole lot of issues that we have come up over the years, legacy that we are carrying forward. But what is the solution? Do you think what ails the Indian healthcare system?
So, I mean, fundamentally, I will address by what is the function or the purpose of a health system. Essentially, it has to meet the health needs of the people. So, when we say health needs of the people, the preventive needs, the curative needs, and the palliative needs. It is not just treating in the hospital alone is the health needs. So in that context, if we look at health needs in terms of access to these health needs, we have progressed as a country, I mean by default or whatever, inorganic growth in terms of improving that access, reaching out to a physician or reaching out to emergency service or reaching out to a hospital. Thanks to whatever unregulated or regulated growth of the private sector, there is at least people can reach some of the healthcare facilities. Now in fact healthcare is reaching the homes That itself is a progress, I would see. But what is, I think, most glaring is how much of this health care they can afford. That is the first thing, which the health system should address on that. The second is because of the varying cost of health care, there is a huge inequity among the people whether they can access. So access is not limited by geography. Now access is limited by affordability. So that's one challenge has to be addressed in terms of financial protection to access health care. Having said that, I mean, while you produce financial protection, for example, you say that I will offer free institutional delivery for mothers. It's not enough that you are offering a free healthcare service, but is it of good quality? Is it of good safety? Despite giving free protection, I mean, despite having the financial protection, still 70% of preventable deaths, the premature deaths, that means people are not expected to die before 60. So people are dying before 60, that means it's a failure of health system. So those 60-70% of the preventable deaths is on account of poor quality. So people don't talk about the quality. In fact, the people have the right to access a high quality care. I mean, one of the first dictum of medicine is do no harm. If people are dying because of the safety of healthcare, I mean, if the healthcare facility itself becomes harmful to people, then you are defeating that purpose. So that is the second aspect I will address, that is the quality of healthcare. How it is being actually stewardship is there, who is driving it, who is regulating it, who is demanding quality of health care, which people deserve. So that is the second aspect of that which needs to be addressed urgently. The third aspect is, I mean, we create the beds. I mean, in the COVID epidemics, immediately we could create infrastructure, we could create ventilator beds, we could create oxygenator bed, but where were the people? People were not there. People to manage patients were not there. People competent to manage these patients were not there. So we haven't addressed the human resources for health. There is a gross inequity again on the human resource for health in terms of the distribution. I mean, 80% of the human resource for health are concentrated in the cities, but 60% of the health needs are in the villages. So this is another issue that needs to be addressed as a part of the health system. So these are the three things I would say in terms of the financial protection, how people are protected against healthcare expenditure. As you rightly said, the impoverishment and the catastrophic health expenses pushing close to 100 million people into poverty. And majority of them come from India, on global 100 million people. So which should not be there. I mean, I think economically we are becoming third or fourth powerful economy in the world, but in the health indices we are in the bottom 4. So these are the 3-4 things I would say need to be addressed on a priority basis. I think this is what I could summarize.
We have a dichotomy in India. We look at successive governments, how they have handled healthcare and how they have failed to handle the healthcare part of it. The spending, as you said, on GDP is abysmal. On one hand, you have a state like Kerala, which has got healthcare indices including maternal mortality, infant mortality at rates which can be even compared to the most advanced European countries. And then you have Uttar Pradesh and Bihar and other states which drag down this entire factor down. So we have two different kinds. It's not that India does not have a good healthcare system. India has it, but it has in pockets. Where do you think we have failed? I mean, successive governments, one can always go back and do a post-mortem of what went wrong, but where do you think we failed in terms of delivering that continuum of care as you described?
Yes, so the failure is on multiple facts. I mean, on one side, it is on the social determinants of health, because in fact, social determinants account for 60% of longevity or 70% of longevity. The actual healthcare provision accounts for only 20 to 25% of longevity. So it has to be looked at a total system level, not only what health system delivers, but also what is the entire social systems which enable this healthcare. So these are the two things. I mean, in terms of the education and its impact on the health, especially the education of mothers and impact on the health. That is where Kerala scores compared to the UP and Bihar. So since some of these subjects are at a state level, I mean health is a state subject, the center has only a ability to enable or nudge the state governments to, so that is reflected in the type of development, overall the economic development of the state or the social indicators in terms of the literacy or the poverty, I mean or the hygiene, local engagement, the community engagement. So I would attribute some of these disparities, I mean because the leadership does not have the depth to understand the complexity of the systems, and also the political capital, I mean if it focuses only on the slogans which win the votes than which improves the societies. I think that was the political capital. I mean we were only looking at what are the optics which can influence the people's voting behavior, and our policies were defined more by those optics of winning the next election than looking at a societal change. So successive governments, I think, neglected in adhering to the promises that they made. For example, the public healthcare system was the only provider till late 80s. I mean the private was accounting for only 10% of healthcare. But the neglect of private healthcare, especially in terms of their governance or their accountability or the graft that crept into the social fabric. So when the public healthcare started defaulting on their primary responsibility, people started seeking for outside the public healthcare. And when they saw it, instead of government strengthening their own public healthcare responsibility, they allowed the private healthcare to mushroom in a unregulated or unmonitored or unsupervised way. So in essence, the successive governments have actually got out of their primary responsibility, because health is not like other sectors. Health and education is the primary responsibility of the government, the public. So that when it stepped back and then allowed, I mean it's not that private healthcare is not normal. I mean it enables, in fact it strengthens the healthcare delivery. But if it is allowed to grow in an unregulated, unmonitored way, that is where the problem comes. So on one side, the public had lost the confidence and the trust in the public healthcare systems. So then they sought healthcare from the private healthcare systems. But of late, we are observing that even the confidence and the trust that the people were having in the private healthcare system, even that is getting eroded. Especially in terms of, in the public healthcare system, people were worried about the poor quality or the dignity that they expect from healthcare. But in the private, they are worried about the ethical practices, the appropriate medical care, the affordability, the cost factor. So in essence, I think the public are left to their own, both by the private healthcare system as well as by the public healthcare system. So that's, I think, as a society, I think we lost our way in addressing the health needs of the people.
I think you rightly said that, because I remember this particular fact about poor people not getting the care they need. It goes with your name actually. At the entrance of the Nallamala forest, there's a village called Mananur. And I had been there for a medical camp, and when I went there, I saw a sister there, and she seemed to be all alone, and there were about 20 patients lying all around the place. And I asked her, where is the doctor? She said, in Telugu, she told me, he comes in only once in a week, and he has to come from Hyderabad. I was shocked. I said, here is the primary healthcare center set up by the government, and it doesn't have a regular doctor who comes in at least once in a day. Forget him sitting the entire day, at least a better part of the day. So how do you think we can ever deliver good quality care to the poor, the impoverished, because they are at the bottom of the pyramid?
Yeah, so I have a hope, because I'm observing closely the health systems and what are the initiatives that are happening in the health systems. I will articulate few initiatives which have been in the recent years. At least the intent and the initiatives and the impact that they can bring. Ayushman Bharat is there. So it is addressing two aspects. What I raised in the beginning. On one side, it is addressing how to extend the financial protection. how to make it universal health coverage. I mean, as a signatories to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, how do we increase the coverage to the people? So the PMJ, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, I mean, which addresses the health protection, is moving in the right direction. I mean, if it targeting almost 400 million people, and also recently with the COVID situation, there is a policy articulation that to include even the missing middle in that. That means the migrant laborers or the middle class who have no protection of either employee protection or the public protection. So by expanding these things, and they're also looking at how to amalgamate the varied public health schemes where the government is paying for that and bringing efficiency into the payer system. So I'm observing what happened in the developed world in terms of the bifurcation of the payer system and the provider system. So this actually brings the accountability of the provider system. So that is one major reform I'm observing in terms of the movement towards the universal health coverage. The second is strengthening the primary health care. As you rightly said, I mean, that is the most important aspect, especially as we move towards the demographically towards the lifestyle related diseases, the non-communicable diseases, which are lifelong diseases. So unless we strengthen this primary care, unless we strengthen the continuity of care, no country, including the US, can afford the new non-communicable disease spectrum. So that's where I think every country is now shifting back their focus onto the primary health care strengthening. I mean, that is where the health and wellness clinics, if they are implemented well, I mean, in design, they're perfect. In implementation, I'm not sure. I mean, if the legacy goes, the past history goes, we may not see the hope that we are seeing, at least in the intent and the policy of these health and wellness clinics. But by saying that we are investing into 150,000 health and wellness clinics, and we are on track actually as per the targets in rolling out these health and wellness clinics, and also in trying to leverage the power of technology. In fact, when you mentioned my rural health program 15 years back, when mobiles were not there, smartphones were not there, that was the vision that the technology can leapfrog our country to surmount some of these gaps which we have been, almost we became helpless, that doctors don't go to villages, the nurses don't go to the villages. Can technology bridge this gap? I mean, you have the 1 million ASHA workers who are the connectors between the people and the physicians and the nurses. And if these ASHA workers can be my eyes, my ears, and my hands to get my health data so that I can diagnose the case, I can plan the treatment, and she can deliver the treatment. So this technology, I think, will enable that. I think it might bridge the chasm on account of enough doctors not being available in the villages or enough nurses not being available in the villages. And if we empower these middle level health workers and we standardize the treatment protocols and we standardize the supply chains, there is a hope that the health and wellness clinics can strengthen the primary health care. So these are the two reforms I see a hope that they might address some of the challenges. The third announcement, which recently happened because of the COVID, which has been pending for some time, is the National Digital Health Mission. If we can have the health data interoperable across the country and everywhere, I mean, at each touch point from the womb to tomb, whatever health data that is generated for each person, if it is tagged to that person, and if that person has the right over his own health data to share with people where they require. So we can see, I think, a potential revolution in terms of the health data, how it can again enable some of these dysfunctional health system to become stronger. What we demonstrated in technology in terms of Aadhaar, I mean, just having every citizen one ID, every individual one ID, and able to link a account, a financial inclusion account in the Jan Dhan scheme, you are able to directly transfer the benefit. That means the spillage that used to happen, so-called the subsidies or the social benefits, 80% was spilling out actually, that only 20% was actually reaching the beneficiaries. So that power of technology to eliminate this middleman and reach the social benefit directly to the beneficiary if it can be achieved through these digital technologies, and we have demonstrated the power of unified payment interface, that means the country has the ability to do that. And we are seeing the efficiency of that. I mean, the amount of financial transactions that are happening in a seamless fashion. Even the food vendor is able to do that this power of digital transaction even when there was no currency. And same thing, I mean, we have demonstrated in terms of merging hundreds of tax elements into a single tax in the form of GST. I mean, the platform, I mean, what I'm looking at is only the platform, the capacity of India to leapfrog in terms of the digital technology. So I think there is a hope that we may leapfrog, just like we were sitting in queues for a landline telephone, but suddenly we had a mobile jump. We didn't have roads, but suddenly we had an airplane jump. Similarly, we don't have doctors in the villages. We may have the digital jump in terms of telemedicine or the power of telemedicine. Or if we don't have the doctors, there may be power of artificial intelligence to diagnose a case as accurately or even better than average doctor.
Dr. Reddy, in fact, that's one of the most interesting subject, because I was a part of the team that built the National Health Portal across the country. I mean, there's a big project that was launched by the Ministry of Health a few years ago. And another component of that, of course, was on the electronic health records, because all scripts had one, GE had one. They never used to talk to each other. You rightly mentioned saying that anywhere from the womb to the tomb it should work. But having set the standards right, India skipped a generation in the mobile phone. We went directly to 2G and then on to 3G. Even in terms of telemedicine, I remember sitting with the previous organization where I worked, and people reaching out to remote areas of the country through telemedicine. This COVID actually has set that in motion. What was lagging, even the government was refusing to include telemedicine as a part of the insurance coverage. Now suddenly you're seeing a huge jump in the digital technology. Do you think post-COVID this will go away, or do you think this is a new normal?
No, this will be new normal. I mean, it is not going to go away. More so given the thrust on the National Digital Health Mission directly by the Prime Minister himself. I mean, it has a beautiful, simple things. I mean, if every citizen has a health ID, every provider has a unique number. That means if I'm a cardiologist, I have a unique number. So every decision of mine, the treatment decision or the diagnostic decision, if it can be traced to me, that if the country can have an account of how many doctors are actually working in this country, still we don't have a data on that. How many nurses are working in this country? How many technicians are working in this country? How many hospital managers? How many public health managers? So those national registers, that is the second element of that. The third element is the language. That means everybody, whoever uses the health data, if it is spoken in the same language, the data standards. So that data standards makes it interoperable, seamless. I mean, what the US is unable to do because of their complex legal system and the ownership system and the lobbying system, we can overcome that by driving this adoption of these standards across the country through the payer mechanism. I mean, you have the financial lever of, say, PMJ, or financial lever of CGHS or ECHS or ESI or Arogyashri. As a financial lever, you can drive the adoption of these standards by the providers when they ask for the claims. You can simplify. In fact, we are deeply engaged in this mission as well on the technical front. So we have created what is called as e-object. That means if I have a e-claims object, that means a simple minimum data set. Any insurer uses only that e-claims form. Now today we have 150 e-claims form, and the data, if same diabetes is coded 10 types, that means I can't know how many people actually have the diabetes. If the same diabetes diagnosis is coded same thing by pharmacist or the diagnostic lab or the physician, I know exactly how many diabetics are there in this country. So that means as a policy maker, I will have a dynamic data on the disease surveillance. Suppose if there is a spurt in the dengue in remote part of the country, if the dengue is coded uniformly across the country, I will be able to point where the spurt is happening. In fact, even before it takes off, we can actually stop it. I mean, that is the power of this monitoring system if there is a standardization. The country is looking at providing that basic spine, the digital spine, and is unleashing the power of open source APIs. So hospitals need not invest into the money, into the infrastructure. I mean, if you have the cloud-based spine, any hospital can log into that and provide that minimum data set. And every patient, every person can have their personal health record. See, as a clinician, what I need of your record is simple things. I mean, what diagnosis you had and you have now, what risk factors you have and you have now, and what are the key vitals you have, and what is the last diagnostic test, and what is the last treatment that you have. I mean, if this much record is available with every patient, we don't have to repeat unnecessary tests. So there is a huge amount of money that can be saved just by not duplicating the test. Yeah, I have it, the deep faith that it can allow the country to make it stronger. I mean, it may not be dramatic, but there is a power of technology, and we have arrived there. I mean, we have one of the cheapest bandwidth in the world, and with the 5G technology coming in, and with the last mile connectivity coming in, this is the right time. I mean, just like every seed requires the right soil, there is always a right time for the country to take the next jump. I have faith that we have arrived there, and we have the ability. I mean, if there is a willingness of the entire societies, I don't blame only the government. I mean, I think as a system, governance extends to entire system, not just the government. Government is only one player in the governance. People are equally responsible, the providers are equally responsible, the payers are equally responsible. Government has only a responsibility of stewardship and the leadership and providing the resources where required, but there is also equal responsibility to the society as well.
This is where, Doctor, I want to makes it a very interesting part, because you have programs like Arogya Shri and then you have Ayushman Bharat that is out there. Now the question is, government doesn't say that get treated in a government hospital. They themselves are acknowledging that there is a problem with the government healthcare system. So they're saying you can go to a private sector hospital which we have audited for a cost that we have negotiated, and you can get treated there. So the question that obviously arises is the government therefore acknowledging that they have can only be in the primary health care, they cannot go beyond primary into the tertiary and other cares. There are of course cases like there are excellent hospitals across the country which are in the government sector, but at the same time, for a country of our scale and size, we did discuss technology, but you're going to see further down the line that more of this insurance related things that are going to come in. We have the Jan Aushadhi Kendras which are delivering generic medicines that are happening. So when you look at the holistic picture, when you look at the complete picture, do you think there has to be a mix and match of both the government and the private? There has to be a mix of the generics and of course the branded medicines.
Yes, as I mentioned, I think the public healthcare, when it got separated from the public payer system, the government as a payer and government as a provider, there is a segregation now. There is the National Health Authority who is the payer, National Health Mission which is the provider. So if this provider can be strengthened and made accountable and the governance system can be improved. So there are models in the world. I mean, if you look at NHS model or some of the models in Thailand and South Korea. So if you make a district cluster, public healthcare cluster as an autonomous unity, what we call strategic wise autonomization and corporatization. Corporatization is not for-profit corporatization, but an independent entity like a trust. So if the government entity as a cluster, suppose the district hospital along with the CHCs and the PSCs as a cluster, it becomes one delivery unit with autonomy. I mean, just like you have Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences or All India Institute of Medical Sciences, they are autonomous bodies. And you see the difference between an autonomous institution versus non-autonomous institution. So when you make it autonomous, you bring in professional management skills into that, the systems into the system, and make public healthcare drive the market competition with the private healthcare. That means they have the level playing field and compete with each other for the same payer. So when you said, should the public payer system encourage selective purchasing from the private system where the public system is weak? Otherwise, second, versus a fundamental right of a people on the choice of provider. So this dilemma always exists, whether we need to respect the choice of a person on the provider, or you make the person only access through public health care but selective purchase from the private health care. So this dilemma is in many countries actually, whether the free choice versus a controlled choice when you are paying for them. So I mean, personally I believe in free choice because health is so personal. I see that a person, if he has a choice of a doctor, if he has a choice of a hospital, is different from if somebody says that you only have to go to that doctor, because that chemistry between the doctor and patient accounts for 50% of their recovery. I mean, people underestimate this chemistry. So having said that, my own position would be that there is an opportunity to strengthen the public healthcare system, and it does not require too much of investment as well. I mean, with the current infrastructure, if they are made autonomous, if the leadership of these autonomous clusters is given enough freedom, and you shift the current financing mechanism from supply side financing to demand side financing. See, when I say supply side, the current system of financing is that I have a line item budget. This much for manpower, this much for drugs, this much for this thing, I cannot cross the lines. So when I have a COVID epidemic or dengue epidemic, suddenly the whole resources that were meant for drugs of hypertension or diabetes, which are chronic diseases, immediately get diverted to these crises. Whereas the demand side financing is what actually people's health needs. And suppose people need so many consultations, so many hospitalizations, so many drugs, because their demographics is like that, their disease burden is like that. So if I finance according to the needs of the people, that is what is called demand side financing, according to the services that I am required to give to these people, then on the supply side financing, that I only give you 100 rupees and you take care of these people. See, for a PSC which is servicing say 10,000 people versus a PSC which is servicing 2,000 people, the budget is same, whereas the health needs are 5 times different. So that is a simple rule shift. I mean, whole countries except Africa has shifted to demand side financing. So when you have a demand side financing, then you make the management of these autonomous providers accountable for delivery. I mean, if they provide a good quality care at a less cost, that means a value-based care, they will be incentivized. In fact, the people working in this cluster can be incentivized. So that is the motivation for these people. So there are strategies. I think we have articulated through our research also, which is published by Niti Aayog last year. What are the strategies which the governments can look at based on proven strategies in different countries? So there was an extensive study by almost 100 researchers from the country and a score of research from international experts. At a whole system level transformation. So we articulated strategies in risk pooling. That means how do you pool the entire population as a risk pooling for the insurance. Similarly, strategic purchasing to drive quality, how to bring the efficiency in the provider system, whether it's a public provider or a private provider. Similarly, we articulated on the power of technology, how to leverage that in integrating healthcare and making it very dynamic and agile. And fourthly, we also articulated these strategies which have been adopted by other countries in terms of how do you organize provision and how do you make it efficient and how do you ensure that this provider network gives quality. I mean, quality when we say on the 6 dimensions, is it safe, is it timely, is it effective, is it efficient, is it patient-centered, and what is the patient experience. So the equity, so all these things are measurable and you can quantify and rate a public provider and compete with a private provider. So that's where, I mean, in addition to strengthening the public health care, the government responsibility in terms of the stewardship. See, today the mentality is that government thinks it is only responsible for public health care system. No, government is responsible for the entire health system, both private and the public. So that negligence, that responsibility, I mean, if government is not taking that responsibility by engaging private providers in every decision making, if there is a shared purpose of both private providers and the public providers, that the shared purpose is for keeping people healthy, securing people's health, and there is a responsibility for private care. I mean, despite the primary responsibility of a for-profit private providers in terms of maximizing the profit. No, healthcare, it does not apply. There is nothing like maximum. I mean, it should be sustainable. That means it should be able to service the capital, but it should not be maximizing the profits. Because health is a different business altogether. I mean, it is not, cannot be equated with IT, it cannot be equated with manufacturing, it cannot be equated with other services. So there is a responsibility on the private healthcare that it has to be, I mean, when I say sustainable, because I come from the private healthcare, I always believed that even if it is a public healthcare, there is a capital going into the public healthcare. It is the public money, and it should service that capital, even if it is free. So when you say cost of capital is 15%, weighted average cost of capital, whether it is a public healthcare provider or a private healthcare provider, they should generate that surplus money to service that capital so that you can keep replacing the equipment that is required as the technology advances. So, but beyond that, suppose I take 100 crores investment and then I have to generate 15 crores. I have to generate 15 crores. There is no other option. But it's the same 100 beds. If I am able to make it in 10 crores, not 100 crores, without compromising on the quality of the operation theaters or the ICCUs or the equipment, my strain on the costing and the pricing is much 10 times lesser. So these are, I mean, some of the fundamentals, unless there is a dialogue between the governance systems and the private providers, and there is a spirit of partnership and making that, yes, we are also working for the public health, not just for the profit, not just for the shareholders. That is one thing I notice actually, that something which is a damaging thing happened. I mean, the private equity investment to create capacity in the private healthcare by the funds which are only short term, 5 years to 7 years time. And within that 3 to 5 years time, they have to generate or maximize the returns on their investment. That is not aligned with the purpose of medicine. I mean, that is what, in fact, as a model that we created, was how do we balance between our need to sustain the capital or sustain financially versus the fundamental purpose of medicine in terms of quality, affordability, and access. That demonstration that it is possible, it is not impossible. So, yeah, I think I addressed it a little lengthily, but there is a responsibility of both public healthcare as well as the private healthcare, equal responsibility. And the government is responsible for both, not just for alone. So this is, I think, my summary recommendation how to strengthen that.
Yeah, that's, I think, of course, there is always this talk about private funds entering the healthcare system and then they want to exit at a good price that they invested in. As a closing comment, Dr. Reddy, would like to know from you, you're an optimist as well as I am an optimist. We're always optimistic that our healthcare system will improve. There'll be new models. There are hundreds and thousands of startups who are coming with different kinds of models that are working out in healthcare. One need not always get to a major hospital for every ailment. They can be treated in their own villages, in their own districts, in their own mandals, instead of traveling to a city and causing a huge economic disturbance to the family. So, on a closing note, do you think you're really optimistic that the entire thing will turn out better, maybe say 25, 50 years from now?
Yes, I think we need not wait until that time. I mean, if there is a will, I can see it happening much earlier. I mean, if we can just implement whatever we have initiated in a more focused way, in a more efficient way, we will be there in the next 5 years actually. For example, I mean, the concept of direct to home, you're able to see now. I mean, people are able to get their samples at home. They are getting the reports onto the mobiles. Not only just in the cities, it's possible even in the villages. So tomorrow, if I say that somebody, suppose public healthcare is unable to strengthen their primary healthcare, but as a payer, let us say Aarogyasri or PMJ, I say that, okay, 100 villages, you take care of the primary healthcare needs. You follow these standard treatment guidelines. You deliver this. We will pay you per capita this much. I mean, there are aggregator platforms today. The aggregator platform can standardize the care of a physician in a village or nearby village.
I think it's already happening, isn't it? Because
it's happening already.
Happening. I've seen this in possibly in Andhra and even in Telangana, where the government has actually leased out these centers to the private players, and they are really working on it.
So there is a possibility. I mean, it need not. We don't have to get totally out of the public health care, because we also have seen the disadvantage of private health care during the COVID epidemic.
That's a big story. In fact, I didn't want to get into that part because that's a landmine that you're stepping into. But I think, Dr. Reddy, it was wonderful speaking to you, because such a long time. I wish we could talk another day. I'm sure we will find another day, another set of subjects to speak on. But I think it's wonderful that you spent your time with us to speak to HIBIS Conversations here and talked about a lot about the continuum of healthcare. You have a breadth and the scape that you worked on as a CEO of CARE and other hospital that you worked in. And I think you brought in a lot of lessons into the healthcare system itself. So thank you very much for speaking to us at HIBIS News and HIBIS Conversations. And ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Krishna Reddy Nallamala, bringing forth his wide expertise in the field of healthcare to tell us what is right, what is wrong, and what can be right in the field of healthcare. We all know that this is a country where people trust doctors as their gods, and surely that trust must never be broken. We have seen during many a crisis that patients actually fall back on two things, either the God or the doctor. And I'm sure going forward, we will find new ways in which the Indian ecosystem will find to make healthcare affordable. Thank you for watching HIBIS Conversations.